Good evening everyone, my name is Serenity Prime and I am bringing you a final update and guide to our Smite Slayer build. I had two goals in mind with this build. The first was to play Smite, as I find it to be a very enjoyable and satisfying skill to play. The second was to see if stacking our flat damage Abyss Jewels was still worth it and was still a viable strategy. Now there are three main things that I believe determine whether or not a build is good and worth playing. The first is clear speed. We want a fast clear speed. The faster we go, the more maps we do, the more money we make, the more fun we have. The second thing would be our damage. If we don't have enough damage, we can't kill the bosses and we can't take down any high tier content without sufficient damage. And the third thing is our survivability. If we die all the time, we're not going to have much fun, we're not going to be able to do higher tier content. So let's start with our damage. As you can see in the clip in the background, which is a tier 2 glacier map, everything is dying very fast. We can almost break out the entire legion, we can easily kill all the rare mobs, we breeze through the ordinary map mobs, and then when the boss comes down, it is immediately destroyed. If we then go to a tier 15 map, which I no longer have the footage of as I accidentally deleted it, we breezed through that as well. There wasn't really anything that gave us pause except for the Legion, at which point the only reason it gave us pause was because of the sheer damage that those mobs can dish out in such numbers. As for the boss of this map, it died very rapidly to our double strike and focus combo. However, when we tried a tier 16 map, we ran into issues with killing the Guardian. The ordinary map mobs themselves were easy to kill. We even had a Beyond mod on that map, and the Beyond mobs were easy to kill, including one unique boss. The Legion mobs on that map were a little dicey. Their damage scared us, because we do not have the defenses to stand up to tier 16 Legion mob rares in such numbers. But apart from that, everything else was going very smoothly, up until the Guardian fight. Now, this was a forge of the Phoenix map, so we were fighting the Phoenix. We threw down all of our damage, and by the time we ran out of our burst capabilities, it was only at 2/3 of its health. So our burst damage is not high enough, and it cannot be sustained long enough for us to go after a tier 16 Guardian. And now to our clear speed. As you can see in the background, because our damage is sufficient, our clear speed is also sufficient. With our charges up, we get quite a high attack speed bonus from them, so we can leap slam into packs, attack a couple of times, and then leap slam to the next pack. This leads to a fairly fluid gameplay, as our leap slam also gives us fortify, which improves our defenses, keeping us alive, and all in all is a very pleasant experience. And now to our survivability. We have 5000 health for a level 84 character. We have fortify linked to our leap slam, so as long as we hit something with our leap, which we should be doing if we're jumping into packs, we'll have fortify. We have our granite flask to buff our molten shell, so that molten shell gives us about 3500 effective life when we use it. And then we have our wise oak bismuth flask, which reduces all elemental damage we take by 10% because our resistances are perfectly balanced. Now, with this level of survivability, mapping ordinarily is not an issue. There is no real concern that we have while just clearing out a map. If we do find anything that looks slightly scary, say a beast or a powerful essence mob, we pop molten shell and we burst them down before they can burst us down. This isn't really an issue. Where we do run into issues is extended combat, because we want to burst them down quickly. If the fight goes on too long, it gives them more time to damage us, our molten shell runs out, and our own damage runs out. So they start to really hit us quite heavily. The other thing to watch out for are those Legion mobs. If you come across a large group of rares, they will absolutely wail on you. And they hit like trucks when they're all supporting each other with various different auras. So in that scenario, we have one option: to leap slam around like a wild man. We get into the right position by doing so, and then we hit them back, and then we continue leap slamming around like a wild man until we see another opening. If there's too many of them, of course, you're gonna have issues. If it's only one or two rares, you can take them head on fairly comfortably. They don't really have enough damage in a single hit to take you down. So as long as your Molten Shell is up, you have the burst to get them first. So now we come to our gear. I will explain what gear I feel is necessary to the build, what is not able to be cut out and substituted for something else, and then I'll show you the gear that can be cut out and substituted for something else. So we'll start with our sword. Now the main stats on this, since we're stacking flat damage from our Abyss Jewels, is we want the added flat damage on our sword to make up for our Abyss Jewel nerf. We want as much attack speed as we can physically get, and we want a high increased elemental damage with attack speed roll. Other good stats are obviously the ones we can craft on, such as chance to deal double damage while focused. Now since we're doing a one-handed build, we have a shield. The stats we're looking for here is as high life as we can possibly get, decent resistances for what we need, and then we also craft on chance to deal double damage while focused, so that combined with our weapon, we get roughly 30% chance to do double damage for 4 seconds when we desire it. Next up is our helmet. Our priorities here are the nearby enemies have minus 9% to lightning resistance that you get from fossil crafting with a metallic fossil. Our next priority is of course life. After that comes our resistances, and then if we can, we want it to be as high amount of armor as we can afford. As for enchantments, I feel the best enchantment for Smite is just the 40% increased damage. The other enchantments just don't feel as useful. Increased area, we have enough area as you've seen from the earlier clips, and we don't really need to hit extra targets. That really only gives us more area that we hit, and as I just said, we don't really need it. As for our gloves, the Tomb Fist is an essential part of our build because we need the Abyss sockets. I have a 2 socket here, but a 1 socket will work almost as well. You just miss out on 1 Abyss Jewel. We don't bother with a Searching Eye because maiming enemies for us doesn't do anything. We don't get the damage bonus because it's not the main gem, and the slowing them isn't really important. As for a belt, a Stygian Vise is also a staple of this build for the Abyss socket. Our stats that we want here: high life as possible, increased elemental damage with attack skills as high as we can get, and decent resistances where we need them once again. As for our boots, we want the move speed. We don't run around very often, but when we do, we want to be able to get out of the way of things if we don't want to leap slam around. The other key points here: as high life as we can get, resistances that we need, and as much armor as we can get. There's a theme going here. As for our chest piece, there's a few options we have available to us, as I've said in previous videos. The one I decided to go with is an ordinary 6-linked armor chest piece, touched by the Elder, so that we get increased attack critical strike chance. I feel like that really helps. I didn't feel I was getting enough crit chance from the skill tree, so I rolled one of these and we went with it, and I feel that worked out reasonably well. Our other options, we could use an Impulses. It would help with our clear speed, it would give us a damage boost, but we'd lose a bit of life and resistances. In this case, we don't have any resistances on this piece of armor, so we don't really lose it. But if you did have resistances on your chest piece, you wouldn't anymore because it's an Impulses. Now that helps with clear speed, but I feel the clear speed was quite sufficient and impulses wouldn't have really helped out too much in that regard. The third option we have is a Shroud of the Lightless. We get an extra Abyss socket, and it's still technically a 6-link once you've 5-linked it, because it supports everything in it with elemental penetration at level 20, which means we don't need to run a lightning pen support, so we can just run a 5-link, which is a 6-link with that extra elemental penetration. I feel like that would work reasonably well. We get the bonuses per Abyss Jewel to our life, and then we also get the Shade Form every now and then. Now, Shade Form isn't entirely useless, but it's not really up often enough that we would really notice that. For our rings, we seek more life, the most life we can get, increase elemental damage with attack skills as high as we can get, resistances where we need them. If you can get increased lightning damage on them, that's certainly a bonus, and increased accuracy certainly helps with being able to actually hit our targets. We have the same priorities on both of our rings and our amulet, and that's really an overview of what gear we need, what gear we can use, and what gear we can swap out. Last but not least, we come to our skill tree. Now for our skill tree, we took as many jewel sockets as we could in order to socket in our Abyss Jewels. We got as much crit as we could afford in order to get our effective crit chance while in combat up to 75.53%. And our goal was also to get as much life as we could. Now we ended up sitting at about 5,000 life at level 84. A key note here on our tree in terms of damage is also a Watcher's Eye. Now the only thing that we have on this Watcher's Eye that affects us is the damage penetrates 15% of lightning resistance while we have Wrath active. So that's effectively a 15% more damage multiplier for just one slot. Now you could get a better prismatic jewel with other effects such as increased crit chance while affected by Wrath, but that's really gonna break some of your banks. It certainly would have broken mine. This one here only cost us about 50-60 chaos. I don't remember the exact amount, but I do remember that it wasn't very expensive for us to afford. As for our defensive picks on our skill tree, while we mostly choose more life nodes to have a larger health pool, we also choose a few armor nodes just to make sure our molten shell gets a little higher and gives us a little bit more defenses. We take adamant down here to also increase that armor a little bit further, and to also reduce the cooldown of molten shell to just 3 seconds from 4. It gives us a little bit of extra uptime. Now for my build in particular, I did end up taking 2 plus 30 intelligence nodes. Now our reason for that is Herald of Lightning and our Wrath. They require intelligence and we don't get too much of it from our tree. We'd really look for that in our gear, so that is one thing to look out for. You really only save 3 points if you get it on your gear, so I'll leave that up to you guys to decide whether or not it's worth trying to get that on your gear, or whether it's worth more picking the intelligence nodes on the tree like I did. And the last thing I'll mention about our picks is Dazzling Strikes. If you take all of the nodes up until Dazzling Strike, you get a 15% chance to blind enemies on hit with attacks. If they are blinded, we push our crit chance up from 75% to just under 82%, which pushes our single target DPS even higher. And finally, let's take a look at the total amount of damage that we can dish out. Now if we take a look at our total DPS, we sit at a comfortable 420,000 damage per second to a single target with everything up. Now there are 2 ways we can increase that: by either our positioning when we are attacking whatever enemy we're attacking, and if we swap out a gem for something else. We use Ancestral Call to help with our clearing. However, Ancestral Call with Smite can help with our single target as well. If you position correctly, as I've mentioned in other videos, Ancestral Call will proc off of a single target, which means your initial smite will cast that lightning bolt, and your Ancestral Call, which targets the monster that you're hitting the ground next to, will also target that same monster. So you do effectively double your damage. So instead of 420,000, we'd be hitting them twice for 420,000, giving us 840,000 total DPS to a single target with Ancestral Call equipped. Now you do have to be positioned relatively close, and if the enemy moves at all, it can throw out your total damage. So in an ideal scenario, we get that double damage, but more often than not, our target is moving. We are moving because we don't want to get hit ourselves, so we don't actually get that much damage. The other solution is we take off Ancestral Call and we put another gem in its place. Now you can tweak that however you like. You can add different gems. You can even change the gem setup. By my estimates, you'd sit at around 600,000 DPS if you swapped out Ancestral Call with something else that gives you just more damage in general. So to conclude our video, I'll answer the question I posed at the start. Is it still worth stacking flat damage through Abyss Jewels or not? My initial hypothesis was yes. My current hypothesis is unfortunately no. I feel like if we focused more on a physical damage character and just convert that into lightning rather than stacking flat lightning, I feel like we would have gotten more damage out of it for significantly less currency investment. To get jewels like these, this one here has 2 tier 1 lightning damage rolls. That does not come cheap. This one would set you back at least 80 chaos, and I'm being optimistic here. If you wanted one that has life on it, that's 1 tier 1 lightning damage roll, a tier 2 lightning damage roll, and a tier 2 life roll. That one sets you back an exalt or more. There are not many with high lightning damage rolls and high lightning damage to swords, and that is why this build did cost quite a bit. If I was to estimate the total cost of this build, I would say it sits around 5 or 6 exalts, excluding the chess piece. If you wanted to buy this chess piece, you're looking at a minimum of 4 exalts, but I think you'd be more looking at 8 exalts or more. So if you include the chess piece, our budget goes through the roof at 12 exalts. That's through the roof for me. I don't make much currency. If you have enough currency and you want to try it out, go for it. If you want to play Smite though, I suggest not stacking flat damage through the Abyss Jewels. It just doesn't seem worth it anymore. You get 30% less damage than what you would in the past because of that nerf. So with all that in mind, my name is Serenity Prime. Have a nice night.